What's up guys, and welcome to another SM.I.E video. Now this is the second video in the virtualization video series that I started, and as promised, today we're going to look at a little demo on how virtualization can make a huge difference in your organization. If you missed the first video, not to worry, I'll leave a link in the description and you can go ahead and check that video out before you continue with this one. But if not and you're good to go, let's do it. Alright. So if you remember from the last video, we kind of went through what virtualization is, why it's significant, and we gave a brief summary of the different types of virtualization that exist. And importantly, we explained that as a benefit, virtualization basically allows you to take one device and just turn that one device into multiple devices. So today, let's take a quick look at what that looks like and how much of a benefit that can be to an organization. Alright, so for today's example, let's say you're a small company, a startup with 200 or so employees. Now, you need to set up an HR website with a database in the back end that's going to store employee details and all sorts of other different bits of information. And then you're going to need a front-end UI that's going to serve as the landing page for your employees to kind of go and input whatever information that they need to input or request vacation days or whatever, stuff that you do on an HR website. In addition to that, you're going to need some kind of authentication or name resolution to resolve the different internal names that you give to your website and something to authenticate your users whenever they're trying to log in, right? Now, this is going to be an internal site, so of course it's only going to be accessible from your local LAN, that is, whenever it is that you're in office and you're on the local network, or if you have some kind of client-side VPN that allows you to connect remotely into your office network and access everything that sits on your office network. So typically, this type of setup is going to be a 3-server type setup. So you're going to have your domain controller and your DNS probably on one server, and then you have your web application on another server, and then you have your database on another server. So that's basically 3 different servers. So from a specs perspective, what are you going to be looking at for these 3 different servers? All right, let's look at that, but let's make it standard across the board. Right? So for each of those servers, let's give them some standard specs. So we're looking at your domain control and your DNS plus your web server and your database server. So let's say for each of those servers, let's say you want 64 gigs of RAM, and then maybe you want a 12-core processor, and you probably want 6 terabytes worth of hard drive space. Now, something like that is going to cost you around $10,000 to $20,000 US. Yeah, if you don't believe me, you can Google those numbers. Now, as for what you need, let's say you split that number down the middle, 10 to 20, let's say you said 15. So you're going to need 3 servers. So that's 3 times 15K. That's $45,000 for 3 servers that you're going to need. And if you start to talk about redundancy, now you're going to double that number. That's 6 servers. So you're looking at $90,000 to get 6 servers for a redundant configuration. But what if you could take just one of those servers with those specs and do exactly what you need? This is where virtualization comes in to save the day. So let's see it in action. All right, so this is what your typical setup is gonna look like. You're gonna have your 3 servers, your web server, your database server, and your domain controller / DNS server. You're gonna have those servers all individually, right? Each of them are going to have their own IP addresses and their own connections back to your distribution switch, which is then going to be connecting back to your gateway or your edge router or edge firewall or whatever the case may be. And everybody's going to have their own management interface and everything. But this is not what we want. This is what we want. One server that's virtualized being used as 3 different servers with their own IP addresses and everything, similar to the previous diagram, but it's going to be an all-in-one kind of setup. Let me show you how easy it is to achieve this. We're going to use VMware ESXi, which is pretty much my favorite virtualization tool to work with. But the first thing that I want to show you are the steps that we're going to follow to actually get this done.
So these are the steps that we're gonna follow to get this done. 7 steps, pretty simple. First thing is we're gonna create a DNS entry or a DNS record for the ESXi server. So we're basically gonna give the server a name and put it in our DNS. And that can be the same as your domain controller. It can be separate, depends on how you want to do it or how you have your network set up. This can be the same DNS server that you're going to use to control your VMs or your virtual machines, which are going to be the virtual servers when you deploy them later on. Or in my case, it's a separate DNS server that I use for management of my lab environment. So the DNS server that I deploy for those VMs would be something different, right? Then we're going to want to create a bootable USB or CD from the ESXi ISO file. You can download that ISO file for ESXi from VMware, and then you create a bootable USB or CD so that we can boot the server with that. Then the next step is that we're going to access the server BIOS and configure the server to be booting from the USB or the CD. Or it might just be in the boot sequence configuration for the server. Then you insert the USB or the CD and boot from there into the ESXi configuration mode. Then the next step is to configure the ESXi management settings. So your IP address, your VLAN, if you're going to be using VLAN. And I'm going to explain to you why that would be the better way to go later on. And you configure your host name, and then you configure the management NICs that you're going to use to manage the ESXi host server. And that is going to be dependent on how many NICs you actually have on your server, right? The next stage is going to be to log into the vSphere web client and to configure the storage, whether it's some external storage or if it's internal storage. External would be some other storage system that you're going to set up as a SAN or a NAS or even some NFS storage or something that you're going to be using. Or internal would be whatever internal hard disk storage space that you have on that server. And then you're going to go in and create your virtual machines. And then we're going to do some testing to make sure that the virtual machines are connected and that you can see that they're actually connected on the network and you can get to them from wherever. Those are going to be the steps that we're going to follow here. Just a quick point to note though, or that I want to let you guys know before I start. So these in this list of steps, really and truly for me, I'm just going to be focused on step 1 and step 5, 6, and 7. Reason being is I am actually virtualizing or simulating a physical server within my virtual environment, because I don't have any physical servers that I can do this on. So basically, I'm just simulating a physical server, or what would be essentially a physical server within my virtual environment, and doing the process from there. So step 2, step 3, and step 4 wouldn't really relate to me in my environment, because my stuff is virtual. I'm using a practice that's called nesting. So I already have a virtual environment, and then now I'm virtualizing even more within that environment to show you guys how. I just wanted to let you guys know that, so you understand how I start this. But those steps are pretty much physical, so they're pretty much self-explanatory as well. All right, so let's get started. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna go according to the list, the steps that we had before. So first step was to create a DNS entry or DNS record. That's the first thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna jump into my DNS server, which is also a virtualized server in my lab. And because I'm in the ESXi client, I can access all of my virtual machines or virtual servers from here, right? So I'm going to just log into my DNS server, and I'm going to create a DNS entry for that new server that I'm about to do. And let's call it ESXi 7. Let's run through that right now. ESXi host 7, let's call it that. So the fully qualified domain name, FQDN, is going to be ESXi host 7.netlab.home, and I'm going to give it the IP address that was listed on the diagram that we looked at earlier. Let's get that IP address back up. All right, so the IP address is going to be 10.0.0.20. Okay, all right. Let's get that IP address configured. 10.0.0.20. All right. head back to this. Okay, 10.0.0.20. Put that in. And dot 0.0.0.20. All right. Add that host. Record is created successfully. We are done. All right. Our record is in. So we can close out the DNS server. The next thing that I'm going to do here is just boot up this test server, right? Now, I already have built out a physical or simulated physical server, and I already have it configured to boot from the ESXi ISO once I turn it on. So I'm going to pull on this server, and once it comes up, then we should be able to see everything that's happening there. All right, so it's booting, and it's going to be booting into the ESXi installer. So I'm going to just let this run out a little bit, then I'm probably going to fast forward or skip through this phase, the boot process, to the configuration phase, right? So just look for that right now. All right, so the boot sequence is done, and we are now into the configuration section for ESXi. That boot sequence is basically what you're going to see once your server is booting up, and it's booting up into the ESXi page or configuration setting or whatever the case may be, whatever you want to call it. All right, now we're going to configure it. So you can read the license and so on. I've done this several times. So I'm just going to press F11 for accept. And it's going to scan for drives that it can install the operating system on. So I have two drives on here. I have a 20 gigabyte drive and a 160 gigabyte drive. The 20 gigabyte drive I put there so that I can install the OS. The 160 gigabyte drive is going to be like if we're installing virtual machines, we can use that space for disk space for those virtual machines or virtual servers, right? So I'm going to select this. It's already highlighted in yellow, so I'm just going to press enter to continue because it's going to install the OS. I'm not. Select US default for the language, and I'm just going to give it a password. This can be anything you guys want to give it as your password, but you have to make sure that the passwords are consistent, right? So once I input password, just press enter, and it's going to say it's going to install. Press F11, and the installation process has started, right? So I'm just going to allow this to run off as well. This might take some time, so I might skip through this as well to the end of the process, and then you guys can see that. Okay, so once the process completes and ESXi is installed, you're going to see this message which is up on the screen right now. Once you're done, it's going to ask you to remove the installation media before restarting. So if you have that USB in, or if you have that CD-ROM in, then just take it out at this point and then just press enter so that it reboots. And when it reboots, it's going to boot up into the ESXi as the operating system on it. And boot up like, your Windows machine would boot up, but instead vSphere ESXi or VMware vSphere is going to be the operating. So I'm going to skip through this part as well because this is going to take a little while. And then once it boots and we're on the vSphere screen, then I will take you guys from there again. All right, so now that it's all done and it's all restarted and everything, and it's up in that configuration page for VMware ESXi. This is after it's all booted and it's installed. The last thing I'm gonna do today is just go through step 5, which was to configure the ESXi management settings, which would be the IP address and VLAN and hostname and all of that stuff. I'm gonna configure that here on the server, and then I'm gonna show you that we can access it now through our web page, which is the vSphere web interface, right? So first thing, if you look at it, you notice that it has an IP address there for IPv6 IP, and it has default the DHCP IP address because it's not getting a DHCP IP address for IPv4, right? So it's going to come up with a default IP address or an auto-provision IP address by default. So you're just going to go in and change all of that stuff, right? I don't want IPv6 on this, so I'm going to actually disable IPv4. All right, so F2, we're in. I'm going to log in with my password. And then once you get in, then we start to configure. Now, you can't use your mouse here, so everything that you configure is going to be by using the keyboard, right? All right, so Remember we talked about in step 5 configuring the different management NICs that you're going to be using. All right, so my server has 6 NICs, right? And I can use any amount of these I want for management and for redundancy and all of that stuff, but I'm only going to use 1 NIC for management, and then I'll use the other 5 NICs for different things as we go along. I'll talk about that a little bit later when we go on, right? So I can get back out of this, press escape. Now, we spoke about VLANs, right? No, you can just configure an IP address on this host and manage the host from there. Or what you can do is to configure a VLAN. Say you were trunking a VLAN to this host, you can configure that VLAN on the host so that you can configure a management IP on that VLAN that's tagged to this host. Why that's better is because if you just configured an IP address on the host, then you are the switch port that you connected to on that NIC, it would have to mean that that particular NIC that you're connected has is accessing that network specifically, and you're not going to be able to use that NIC for anything else but that management port. But if you trunk a VLAN, then you can trunk multiple VLANs across your network connection to this NIC, and you can configure multiple VLANs on different VMs, thereby keeping your network segmented internally on your ESXi, right? So it's much better to use VLANs than just to configure the IP address directly on the interface. So I have my default VLAN that I'm using for management, so I'm just going to put VLAN 1 here for that IP subnet that I'm about to put in. So I'm going to set a static IP address here. 10.0.0.20 was the address that we said. That's /24 IP 0, and the gateway is going to be 10.0.0.40. I'm going to use that as my gateway for this. Enter. IPv6, like I said, I don't want IPv6, so I'm going to disable it. That's going to force me to restart this server, right? Disable, that's fine. This is where I'm going to set the host name when you go into DNS configuration, right? So primary DNS server is going to be 10.0.0.46. That's the DNS on my network. No alternate DNS server. ESXi host 7 was the name that we came up with. I'm going to give it that name, and I'm going to say okay. Enter. All right. Now if I press escape to go back, it's going to ask me if I want to save. Just click yes, and it's going to save it, and it's going to restart my server because I chose to disable IPv6. You had read that message that came up with what I told you. That's going to restart. So it's going to go through the boot process here, shut down, and come back up. And I'm going to skip through this again, and I'll take you guys back up once it comes up, and then just show you, do some tests to access this server, and then just show you that we can access it. And that's going to be it for this video. And then I'll take the rest of stages, stage 6 and 7, in a next video. Okay, so it's gone through that process, it's rebooted, all of my configuration is now set, and we are looking at the main screen once it's configured and it's rebooted and it's just in idle mode, right? All right, so we've configured our IP address 10.0.0.20. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna just do a test, a network test. I'm gonna do a ping test to this. So this is from my computer. I'm just gonna ping that IP address 0.0.20. See if I can reach it. Boom. So IP address is reachable. All right, cool. So next thing that we're gonna do now is just for me to access this. So let's access it. Let's use the FQDN, right? So HTTPS, and it is ESXi host 7.natelab.home. There we go. And boom, we're on the vSphere login page, right? Now, we could also access this from the IP address. So if we were to go HTTPS 10.0.0.20, it would have come up just the same, yeah, right? Cool. So it would have come up just the same. So I just wanted to show you that now we can access it. So there is network connectivity to this right now, right? So we've added an IP address and everything is good. All right, so now I'm just gonna log in so you can see. All right, so logging in just so you can see what it's gonna look like. Once we log in, it's gonna look pretty similar to what I have over here. Yeah, it's gonna look pretty similar to that. All right, so this is what you're gonna see first time you log in. It's gonna ask you about this to help improve the client and all of that stuff. You just click that off. Okay, and you're here. Now, this is important. So it's gonna tell you that you're using ESXi in evaluation mode. That is providing you, well, when you just install, this is what you're gonna see. And if you have a valid license, and once you enter your license information, then this is going to go away and it's going to be licensed permanently, right? But if you have no license, and if you're going to lab this or anything like that, then you're going to get 60 days to lab it, which is still a good time. That's 2 months. And in that time, it's full features available and you can do everything with it. So that's not a bad time, right? That's it. Just wanted to show you guys that it's in. The next video that we do on this, I'm gonna actually go through and build out the VMs and work on steps 6 and 7 as we had shown earlier in this video.
All right, so that's it. It's as simple as that. One server, now virtualized, and we can use that one server now to build out our other 3 virtual machines or virtual servers that we're going to need to set up the environment that we talked about. In the next video, that's where I'm going to pick up. I'm going to pick up from step 6 in the steps that I outlined, and I'm going to start deploying those virtual machines that are going to represent those 3 physical servers. That's it for today, guys. Interesting stuff, right? I think so. Like, it's definitely very interesting, and there's a lot more available on this topic, and we're gonna get into a lot of it. But for now, if you enjoyed coming along with me on this journey today, please feel free to hit that like button and drop me a comment. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel for more content. My name is Nate, and I will catch you guys on the next one.